Hi, I'm Anne. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am dressed accordingly in a medieval dress, which is not period specific at all, but I wanted the vibe of the book that I will be reviewing, which is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. I had a lot of thoughts about this book while reading it, so I decided instead of just trying to sum up my thoughts at the end of the month or my mid-month wrap-up, instead of doing that, I would make a dedicated review for it because I have many thoughts, and this is a very complicated, convoluted book. This book was published in 1980. I thought it was older than that, but no, it wasn't. But it was very much, Umberto Eco is a fascinating individual, which before I read this, I did not know anything about him. He was born in Italy in the 30s. He actually survived Italian fascism during World War II, which is fascinating. And then he went on to get a degree in philosophy, even though his father wanted him to be a lawyer. And he ended up dying in 2016, so relatively recently. I wish I had met him because he sounds like a fascinating individual. His top interest, it seems to be, is medieval philosophy, which is interesting because I haven't studied medieval philosophy that much. Mostly I've studied ancient philosophy, think like Greek and Roman philosophy. Eco was obviously a medievalist. He had great interest in philosophy and in history, which really comes through in this book. Now, this book is mostly historically accurate. However, there are some minor details. On Wikipedia, at least, who knows how accurate Wikipedia is. It talks about how Eco admitted that he got some small details wrong in the book. For example, it mentions the characters eating bell peppers, which did not actually come to Italy until like 100 years later. And this book is set in 1327, I believe. But for the most part, it is highly historically accurate, even though it is fictional. Basically, it is a medieval murder mystery. It follows this Franciscan monk named William of Baskerville, yes, a reference to Sherlock Holmes and the Hound of Baskervilles, and Adso, who is actually the narrator of the entire story. Adso is this young Benedictine monk, I believe, and he is the assistant to William throughout the entire book. Brother William and Adso are summoned to this Benedictine monastery in Italy. It is based on the real-life St. Michael's Abbey, which is Santa di San Michele in Italy. It's in northwestern Italy. I will insert some pictures because it is an absolutely beautiful monastery, but that was where this book was supposedly Eco was inspired to set it. And they go to this monastery because there has been this mysterious death of this monk. He fell out a window. However, it's not suicide because the window was somehow closed after him, which meant someone else was up there. So the abbot, who's in charge of the monastery, he comes to Brother William to ask him to solve the case. Brother William is this renowned investigator, I suppose. He was involved in inquisitions, but he began to realize that there was a lot of corruption within the inquisitions that were going on. Inquisitions, most famous is the Spanish Inquisition, but basically in the Middle Ages, there was a lot of accusations of heresy and heretics, which basically meant any person that did not align with the church at the time would be considered a heretic. Doesn't mean that, like, I think we have a view nowadays that like all Christians wanted to like burn heretics. No, that wasn't necessarily true, but I get that during this era, that was a thing that did happen. So William of Baskervilles is very much a reason-centered monk. And that is one of the biggest debates, I would say, in the book, is reason versus superstition. So on the surface, this is very much a murder mystery. You get into it, you follow along the mystery. Adso and William kind of solve the case as the story goes along, and then the murder is revealed in the end. However, there's this different level to this book, and that is the debate within the church that was going on in this time between clerical poverty and wealth. So basically, within a couple days of William and Adso reaching the monastery, there is going to be a meeting of these very powerful men. I think they're a mixture because I know one of them is Dominican, one of them is Franciscan, so I think they're all over the place. By the way, I should have prefaced this because I just assumed, because I am Catholic, that like everyone has like a brief running knowledge of like Catholicism, but that's not true. A lot of people probably don't know what I'm saying when I'm saying like Franciscan, Benedictine, Dominican. Basically, they were different like groups and groups within the Catholic Church. So like the Benedictines were founded by Saint Benedict, and the Franciscans were founded by Saint Francis, and it was just different groups within the Catholic Church that would have their own rules of how they would live life. So for example, the Franciscans were very much about poverty and living a simple life, whereas I think it's the Dominicans, I may be wrong, but they were all about like spreading the faith. So they would tend to travel a lot. So basically at this monastery, there is going to be a discussion and a debate that is going on in the church between the idea of priests living a very simplistic poverty life. They don't wear fancy robes. They don't live in fancy houses, versus the ones that want to spread their wealth and want to appear wealthy to the population. One of the actually real life historical figures within this book is Michael. I can't remember his entire name, but he is a Franciscan monk who is trying to defy the Pope in saying that brothers and priests should live a poverty, simple life. They should not have this advanced wealth. And during this time, there was a lot of church corruptions. Like quite a few of the priests, quite a few of the popes during this time, especially in the next like 100, 200 years, a lot of them had mistresses and children. Perhaps the most famous family was the Borghese family? Don't know how to pronounce them, but they made a couple TV shows about their family. But basically, so it was an issue like this wealth and corruption. So I'm on the fence on the debate, because yes, I see that owning material objects isn't a bad thing, but also if it leads you to being a horrible person, then maybe you shouldn't do it. So in the book, there's these two sides. There's these straight up murder mystery, and there is this much more philosophical, theological debates that go on throughout the book. So let's get into my thoughts about it. This is a very dense book. It's a very difficult book to read. It's very difficult to like pick out clues of the murder mystery, because much of the murder mystery itself is not told in straight up clues. Like, yes, they find clues, but most of the stuff that would lead you to know who the killer is actually told through symbolism throughout the book, reoccurring themes and things like that. So it's not a straight up murder mystery the same way I'm used to it. And also the mystery itself only takes up about half or less of the book. Most of the book is about these philosophical debates, and it makes sense because Eco seemed to have extreme interest in these topics of philosophy. So it makes sense that he would be interested in that. But for me, I really struggled with that because I entered the book expecting it to be like a fun, dark murder mystery, and it was very much more of a dense philosophical debate. I did enjoy how the book was organized. So it is told by Adso when he is an old man, and so he is talking about things that happened, say, 50 years ago or something like that. So we only see things from his perspective, which is great. I think I enjoy murder mysteries where you have a brilliant detective like Hercule Poirot, like Sherlock Holmes, and you see the perspective from someone who is their companion. Same thing like with Watson or with Hastings, or in this case, you've Adso. And I really enjoyed seeing everything from his eyes because he's a very young, impetuous lad, whereas Brother William is much more of a older, hardened man and very much a mentor to Adso. So I enjoyed that. Also, the book isn't organized into chapters. It is organized within days and then times of days. So in the monastic life, I think that's what you call it, in monasteries, they would have certain times of day where the monks would do certain things. It's talked about in the very beginning of the book. Yes, it says each day is broken up into periods of corresponding liturgical hours. So for example, Lauds is between 5 and 6 in the morning. Tertiary is around 9 o'clock in the morning. sect is at noon in the monastery where the monks did not work in the fields. It was also the hour of midday meal in the winter. So each of the chapters are broken up into these sections of the day. So instead of saying like chapter 1, it says like terse, day 2 terse, something like that. So that was a really interesting way to organize the book, and I've never seen it done quite like that. I don't know, it's a very ingenious way to have both chapters and sections of the book, but also break it up into ways that make sense for a monastic life. I also found it very interesting learning about the historical situation of the church during that time. You can tell that Echo takes extreme pride in his detailed research that he's done. I mean, my example of bell peppers, it's such a tiny, minuscule detail that until I read it on Wikipedia, I would never have thought that, that was even something that was a big issue to get wrong or right. But when you're writing a historical novel, it makes sense that that would be important. So I really appreciated just the time and detail he took to perfecting the historical era in which he was writing and the debates that were actually going on during that time. There's also this meta-narrative to the entire book. There's these layers of meaning in the book, and each story, each monk we meet has a story. So in a sense, there are tons of like tiny stories within this one story. And a lot of the stories are things that were really going on during that time, or they are meaningful commentary on ancient stories. For example, Aristotle comes up quite frequently, and his ideas come up frequently in the book. Similarly, it is very much a book of ideas. It is all about meeting these monks, and each of the monks are very unique and different, and each of them has very unique and different ideas. And I enjoyed that because you see Brother William being very logical, rational, reasonable, and some of these monks see something strange and they're like, oh, it must be the devil at work. So they're very superstitious, not reasonable. So it's really interesting to see all of these different monks and how different each of them are. Another theme I really enjoyed is the idea of laughter. There's this debate early on where that it never says that Jesus laughed in the Bible, so thus he must have never laughed, which is such a strange debate. And so William is very much pro-laughter throughout the book. He believes that laughter is good. Whereas this other guy, Georg, he believes that laughter is creating social havoc and will like bring down the social fabric of the world, which is interesting thought. So I love the theme, and it comes up throughout the entire book, this theme of laughter and how great it was. And there were so many like little themes. I could read this book like 20 times and probably not pick up on all the recurring ideas and themes that were discussed in this book because there were so many of them. Okay, I'm just gonna say that there's going to be spoilers from now on. So there are some like weird trippy scenes in this book. Like there's this one with Adso where he sees this girl, she's being brought into the monastery to have an affair with one of the monks, and he becomes like infatuated with her. And he has this really trippy scene where he's like walking through like a field or like the garden. He saw her for maybe like 10 minutes, and now he's like super head over heels in love with her. It was just a very strange scene to see. Like, dude, you've known her for like 1 minute. And yeah, I understand like he's more in love with the idea of love, especially since he hasn't had much experience with love because he is a monk and he's very young. So, but there's some like very weird scenes in this book where I'm like, did you need this? I mean, again, it's exploring different types of ideas, but it was just very weird to me. Another thing I found interesting is the idea that each of the murders, we learn this later on, so this is a spoiler, each of the murders is associated with the 7 trumpets within Revelations, the apocalypse when it comes to the earth. The view is that there's these 7 trumpets, these 7 angels blowing these trumpets, and each trumpet is associated to like different parts of like one is fire, one is sky. I don't remember, but as we learn, each of the victims that's being murdered, they're being murdered in the way that the trumpets are announcing. So for example, one guy is thrown out a window and dies from the fall, aka the sky. He fell into the sky. One is drowned, so water, and so on. So that I thought that was really brilliant and interesting, how to tie like the murders themselves to more of like a biblical idea. So in the end, big spoilers for the end. I won't reveal who the murderer is because yeah, it's a murder mystery. But in the end, the monastery burns down. And it's really tragic because the big highlight of the monastery was this ancient library. And it has so many old books. And the murderer ends up, well, there's an accident. Kind of a long story. When the murderer is revealed, the library is lit on fire. And they can't put it out because the books just are like kindling tinder. They just like catch fire so easily because they're old, they're dusty. So the entire library quickly burns down and it just spreads the entire monastery. And yes, so the entire monastery burns down at the end of the book, and then it flashed forward to 50 years from that time, and Atso is now an old man. Everyone else in this story is already dead, and he returns to the monastery to just see it as its brittle, broken down form, and that is where he's actually writing this book in the remnants of what was once the monastery, and then he leaves the book there and then leaves. And the book actually starts with the author saying that he discovered this book in the 1960s. So really interesting, like the story within the story within the story. I don't know. It was a really interesting book. But it was not at all what I was expecting. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads just because it was so good, but it's really hard for me to give it a rating because it's such a unique and strange book. Like, I won't say I absolutely loved it, but I'm also really glad I read it. Now let's get briefly to the movie, because I saw the movie years ago and I did not remember a lot of the details about it. So I watched it again just earlier today because I wanted to see, well, how similar it is to the book, because I did not remember a lot of these like philosophical debates in the movie. And yeah, I can see obviously the book is 500 pages. The movie is 2 hours. You can't put in all the details that is in the book in the movie. That is 2 hours. However, the movie is interesting. I didn't like the movie that much. It's a good movie. It's well acted. Sean Connery is amazing as Brother William. It was an interesting movie, but they cut out a lot of the philosophical and the theological debates, and they made it also a bit like even weirder. They really amped up the weird scenes that were in the book. And in the book, it just seemed like it fit more with the era, whereas the movie really amped it up to be more like horror. So I don't know, the movie was strange. I do know there is a mini series that came out maybe like 4 or 5 years ago that is like 6 episodes long, and I have a feeling that that might have captured a lot more of the details in the book that the movie did. So I'm curious, maybe I'll watch that eventually. Have you read this book? Have you heard of it? Have you seen the movie? Have you read any murder mysteries like this that really don't focus on the murder mystery all that much as compared to like other ideas, whether it's philosophy, theology, something like that? I'm just curious to see if there's other books out there that are kind of like this. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, like, subscribe. I post every Saturday and Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye! And for reference, this is what the dress looks like.